These are Nebraska corn farmers. They work in acres, not hours, harvesting the energy and climate solutions the world needs. We are proud to stand with you.
The success of tomorrow's soy industry depends on the actions we take today. The future is here, and the time to move is now.
Market Journal, Television for Agricultural Business Decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources in partnership with the Nebraska Rural Radio Association. Promotional support provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and partial funding provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board and the Nebraska Corn Board.
Well, hi everyone, I'm Bryce Duskett, and thank you very much for joining us today here on Market Journal. A lot of information to cover, as always, with the 30 minutes we'll spend together. Pivot irrigation systems, they're a big investment for ag producers. You already know that, but high winds, they can wreak havoc on those units. We'll learn how researchers at the university are trying to limit wind damage to those pivot systems. Plus, drones are used for a multitude of jobs in the ag industry today. We'll see how drones are now giving producers unique data that perhaps can help with some on-farm decisions. Doug Simon from Tredas, he's standing by to give us his thoughts on what's all happening in the grain markets. And as always, Eric Hunt, he'll give us a look at what's happening in the world of weather. All of those stories are straight ahead on the show, but we'll begin by checking in here. The U.S. Department of Agriculture, they've announced the deadline for commodity and specialty crop producers to apply for the Emergency Relief Program for 2022 natural disasters. It is coming up August 14th. Bill Dodd is standing by with all of the information we need. Bill?
That's right, Bryce. If natural disasters impacted your farm or ranch in 2022, there is still time to submit your application for Emergency Relief Program assistance. And if you fall into this category, do not delay in gathering up documentation and contacting your local FSA office to complete the application process. Through the Disaster Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act of 2023, Congress allocated $3.2 billion in funding to cover an estimated $10 billion in undisclosed crop losses. ERP 2022 covers losses to crops, trees, bushes, and vines due to qualifying calendar year 2022 natural disaster events. There are two different options for application. Track 1 leverages existing federal crop insurance or non-insured crop disaster assistance program data as the basis for calculating payments for eligible crop producers who received indemnities through these risk management programs. Track 2, on the other hand, is a revenue-based certification program designed to assist producers who suffered an eligible decrease in revenue resulting from a 2022 calendar year disaster events when compared with revenue in a benchmark year using revenue information that is readily available from most tax records. In cases where revenue does not reasonably reflect a normal year's revenue, Track 2 provides an alternative method for establishing revenue. Likewise, Track 2 affords producers of crops that are used within the operation and do not generate revenue from the sale of that crop as a method for establishing revenue for the purpose of applying for ERP 2022 benefits. Producers are not required to submit tax records to the FSA unless requested by the county committee if required for an FSA compliance spot check. For both ERP 2022 tracks, all producers must have certain required forms on file with the FSA within 60 days of the August 14th application deadline. However, producers can update, complete, and submit required forms to the FSA by Tuesday, October 15th of this year. That's our FSA update this week. Back to you, Bryce.
Alrighty, thank you very much there, Bill. We appreciate it. If you'd like to learn more about this relief program or perhaps some other upcoming deadlines you should be aware of, producers are encouraged to bookmark the website usda.gov. From crop inspections with quadcopters to spraying with octocopters, drones have been changing the face of agricultural practices in recent years. Now one company is looking to utilize those drones to enhance weather profiling using what they call WeatherHive. A recent test flight of this technology took place over some of the fields at the Eastern Nebraska Research, Education, and Education Center, and Market Journal was out on hand to find out how it all works.
Okay, you're landing. Insight is a robotics and avionics company focused on creating novel solutions using things like drones and other types of robotics for defense, agriculture, and now weather purposes. I think for agriculture, it can really be used to help understand maybe land and atmosphere interactions between what you're growing. Also maybe to monitor, the field crops, temperature, humidity, things like that, which might provide insight on pests and other things. And then in addition, I think spray application is a good one because we can make sure we're looking at the wind speed, the wind direction to optimize times for spraying for agriculture and things like that. Today we are testing WeatherHive, which is our new drone system. It works by using AI-coordinated swarms of nano drones that are about the size of our palm. And they work together to sample the atmosphere, providing near real-time observations of temperature, relative humidity, pressure, wind speed, and direction that can then be used for weather prediction, modeling, and more. I think this is a great site because there's so many different crops being grown, a variety of different types of crops being grown, so we can really test and see what we're able to observe and whether we can see those micro-scale differences with respect to the environment over the different crops. And then I think for UNL, in particular the Mesonet, it provides us an opportunity to collaborate and to kind of build that partnership and hopefully see in the future whether we can work together to provide that weather information and make sure we're covering everything spatially.
So the goal of the Nebraska Mesonet, so right now we have about 70 stations across the state that measure all the weather variables and soil variables. So when I met GreenSight back in February at the NASA conference, I thought that their technology with these nano drones can help provide additional data to what we offer because it offers greater spatial coverage than just a point. So rather than getting a point measurement with our stations, we're able to get temperature, humidity, and other wind data over several miles, a continuous measurement several miles from the station. And that data that Jacola and GreenSight takes can then be fed into crop growth models, wildfire models, and other, especially for modeling purposes. And actually the National Weather Service also wants this data for profile data for severe weather and other. It offers them better data on evapotranspiration and, as Jacola said, atmospheric earth fluxes. So the big one for farmers is evapotranspiration. And then that data is also fed into the better crop yield models, which not only are good for crop modeling for yield, but for crop stress and drought, influences of drought and or too much water. I think this is a great opportunity as we go forward. I'm hoping that the Mesonet and GreenSight work together to get these WeatherHives out at strategic locations across the state. And then we can provide data to the Forest Service, to the National Weather Service, to farmers and researchers at UNL.
Now, if you'd like to learn more about GreenSight's WeatherHive drone systems, we provide a useful link along with the story. Find that over on the Market Journal homepage. Up next, we shift our attention over to the grain markets, and joining me on the desk is Doug Simon from Tredas. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
Of course. We appreciate your time here, digest what all is happening in the markets. And I was talking to you about this, and the grains tried to rally just a little bit, but quickly decided to reverse turn. And today, as you and I visit here on a Wednesday, back to posting some new lows.
We did. We finished at $4 on the Dees corn contract and about $10.23 on the November contract. That was a new low on the Dees today. We went down below the 403 low, and so we've had days where the market will get excited. The funds are still pretty big short out there. They were 315,000 short on the corn, and the beans they were 185,000 short last week, or 2 weeks ago, and they went down to about 163. So they've covered some of those short positions, so we get a little bit of that going on, but then a little bit of rain comes into the forecast, and the algorithm starts selling again, and those fund positions, the commercials have started going long, and they've actually got a big long position on the funds. The spec funds are big shorts, but their open interest has started to decline, and the commercial side of it's been increasing. So it's similar to what we were in February at the end of the month when we put in, it was first notice day for the March contract. So
kind of continues to be the theme as we size up just from like a 50,000 foot perspective. Is the funds believe the crop will be out there, really good crop again this year is their perspective, and get a little rain that enhances that perspective, I guess. And demand pictures not getting any more bullish at this point, I guess, as we look at it, is it?
It's the good thing with these low prices, they tend to cure low prices, but also our basis position, we're lower than what we are relative to our competitors. On the corn side, we're cheaper than the Ukraine, Brazil, Argentina, and then the same thing on the bean side, we're probably a dime cheaper than Brazil, and we're closer to the Chinese market. However, China's not coming in and buying as many beans as we would expect. We're pretty low on what commitments are, and the same thing on the corn. But at some point, I mean, there's some political clouds out there with the elections coming up and trade war rumors, and that has concerned people and has pressed the bean market, especially futures-wise, the last few weeks. But we are in a competitive position. We also have the stocks, which is good. If we raise a good crop, we'll have a lot of corn to be available to export. And that's where you see the difference. Well, next week we've got the WASDE report, and you see the carryout stocks from a few USDAs at just over 2 billion of corn. You know, some of them are up at 2.4 billion because they got lower exports and just a fuzz lower ethanol and a bigger yield. You know, USDA is at 181.5 on the yield, and so that's what's going to be interesting next week as we go into that WASDE report.
Spend a minute talking about U.S. basis here locally. How do things look across the countryside?
Columbus is 50 over, and the Bartlett up in Council Bluffs is 25 over. We were 95 over out west in Lexington at the ethanol plant 2 weeks ago, but that's backed off by about 30 cents. But the Columbus market's still hanging in there pretty well. So the basis levels are still pretty firm for old crop corn. A little more reflective of that last report we had from USDA where they actually came back and increased. They decreased last year's carryover, and it basically made things a little more optimistic for next year's demand, and that's helping. So our basis is still pretty firm there, which is good. Beans, we're 10 over right now, and then 25 under for new crop, which that's actually relatively decent. That's maybe even 10 cents tighter than a average basis what you see at ADM Lincoln over 20 years, and that might be prompted by some of the new competition that's coming up at Norfolk.
Norfolk crush is what you're referencing
exactly.
there, and a lot of emphasis is put on perhaps some expansion in the crush space. And
Sure.
Do you remember on top of your mind of when that was supposed to come online?
They're buying beans up in Norfolk currently, and they'll be buying for harvest. They're not buying a lot right now. They're just trying to get things moving. The David City one is still off in the future. I'm not sure. They're under construction, but I don't know what the start date is on that one.
Yeah, appreciate that, Doug.
Yeah.
Let's kind of look big picture here at the crops of what the reality is for the farmer today. And we talk about ARC and PLC insurance options. You want to spend a moment or two talking about those?
Yeah, as we go down toward $4, if you look at the average weighted cash price of the crop next year, which starts on September 1st and goes to August 31st, you'd be looking at PLC payments below that 401 cash price. And if you look at what we see is about a 12-cent basis, it's somewhere around 413 on the futures. We're still a ways away on the beans on that price. But when you look at the ARC on that side, the price on the corn is at 485, but they discount that by 86%, and it's around 417 is where that one will be pricing. And on the beans, it's 1112, and 86% of that's 956. So we're quite a ways away from the beans. But the thing on the county one is that's also contingent upon the county yield. So if we have a good yield in the county and we still have low price, you're probably not going to get a county payment. But if you have a low yield in the county and a low price, most likely then that we would start. But we're at that point where you get that on your base acres that your historical base, not on what you plant, and it's discounted by 85% on those. Those are the things. But we're looking at from our farmers, especially with the corn PLC, that we're in that price support level. It's something we look back at in 2019 and 20. How much you want to have hedged at this point? You should look at that PLC as being part of your risk management component, and we help people understand that and work through that. We've had a lot of our farmers are sending us I think it's a 156 report. You can get that from FSA, and they'll tell you what you signed up for, because not everybody remembers it was ARC or PLC, and they'll give you your basis and they'll give you your acres and your yields.
Well, let's kind of wrap up here on that risk management theme. What else should people be considering now that we're getting into the month of August?
Well, pre-harvest, we were looking at $5 corn We've been talking about selling increments through here, hedging. We like to do that. If we've come down to this $4 level now and you're heavily hedged, what risk do you have at this point? You probably can come out of hedges and go to maybe a $4 put and do some type of short call, some type of strategy where you'd, put a floor in there, give you some flexibility back to the upside, especially if you've got a lot of PLC coverage. You'll want to be looking at some of these harvest basis levels, especially here in eastern Nebraska where the yields are going to be good. Like I said, that 25-cent under basis at ADM Lincoln's good number. Same number at Fremont. And some of the corn basis is dime under up at ADM Columbus. The big question on that corn where we've got such a premium nearby, you may want to wait because some of that premium will carry into the new crop slot. But again, the other thing we're going to be looking at is the big carries in the market. We have 35 cents a carry out to next July. Last year we had big carry just between the Dece and the March at 25 cents. But should I deliver or should I store? But be aware of those carries. In the bean market, there's I think 50 cents a carry from the nove all the way out to the deferred. So with the thought of big crops, there's definitely some carries in there that you want to be thinking about. How if I roll those ahead, or if you've got an HTA on, rolling that ahead. Think about those concepts. But those are the big picture ideas. But yeah, it's pretty depressing right now in terms of price. But when you think of $5 corn in the spring at 200 bushel, that was $1,000 of revenue. Today, if I'm going to raise 250 dry land yield in eastern Nebraska, which is entirely feasible with the way people fertilize and the rains that we had, who knows what August is going to do, but 250 times 4 is also $1,000. Mm-hmm. So where we started in the year, our revenue is still the same. It's a blessing to have the big number of bushels that we're potentially going to have. Hopefully we'll get some rain and we'll continue down that path.
Coming up next week here on the Market Journal, we'll be joined by Jeff Peterson. He is the president of Heartland Farm Partners. Jeff always enjoys hearing from you, our viewers, when it comes to what's on your mind in the world of commodity marketing. So if you have a question for Jeff, go ahead and email us or get in touch on social media. That's where we'll pass your question right along to Jeff next week. Nebraska FFA continues to grow in numbers, chapters, and scope. A recent addition to the FFA in Nebraska is the Nebraska Ag Academy chapter, comprised of homeschooled students. With this chapter, students can compete in different contests, participate in their supervised agricultural experience projects, and of course take online agriculture classes. You can learn more about this unique FFA chapter in the August issue of the Nebraska Farmer. It is now time to take a look at what's happening with weather with Market Journal meteorologist Eric Hunt. Eric, it's been hot and dry as we look out to the past week or so here. I understand you prepared an extended forecast for us as we look back on July and preview what's ahead in August. Take it away, Eric.
Thanks, Bryce. Let's start off by taking a look at the ENSO state. So we were in an El Nino for quite a while. We have now gone into neutral conditions, and there is an expectation that we will be into a La Nina by the time we enter the later portion of the fall this winter. The current look at sea surface temperature anomaly shows a lot of very warm water across a lot of the North Pacific and across the North Atlantic and a lot of the Atlantic in general. But across the central and eastern equatorial Pacific, we have seen an increase in easterly trade winds and some upwelling. So we have seen those sea surface temperature anomalies get a little on the cool side, indication that we are starting to head toward a La Nina. The official CPC forecast is for us to remain in neutral for pretty much the remainder of the summer, but head into La Nina for this winter. But it's not expected to be a particularly strong La Nina, and it may not be particularly long lasting, as there is a 50-50 shot that we will be back at neutral conditions as we head into next spring. As we head to look month of August, the CPC shows pretty much warm favored for the entire country, including all of Nebraska, with warmer than average temperatures favored as we head further west in the state. One caveat, though, is that if we take a look at some guidance from the European model, it shows some really strong ridging across northwestern Canada and some deep troughing in the eastern portion of Canada. That would actually help drive in some much cooler air into the north central U.S. So if this comes to fruition, say between like August 8th and 12th, we could have a nice little stretch of temperatures staying in the 70s for highs and maybe even getting well down the 50s for lows. Again, this is a little ways out, but it's something that is starting to be a possibility as we head toward the middle of August, at least a temporary reprieve from the heat. The European model does show it being relatively warm through pretty much the entire country through the month of August, so pretty much in agreement with the CPC. The CFSO, on the other hand, is kind of an outlier, maybe not an outlier, but certainly offers a dissenting opinion with much cooler temperatures expected across the northern plains and western Corn Belt. In terms of the composites, so look at some other years that might look a little bit similar, 10, 16, 17, and 20. Not necessarily great analogs, but possible analogs. And they do show there is some signal for potential for cooler weather across portions of the central United States, with generally warm on both east and west ends of the United States. For precipitation, again, the CPC shows below average favored. Again, this seems to be relatively likely, particularly the further west you go in the state and in the western U.S. For the European model actually shows no real signal for precipitation for the month of August. Again, I'm concerned for a lot of the western U.S. this is probably not dry enough, but we will see. The CFS certainly is a dissenting opinion on both temperature and precipitation. Particularly precipitation shows pretty much the entire region as being wetter than average. I actually hope this really comes true for a lot of the Panhandle. It really help take care of some of the, at least put the kibosh on the drought getting much worse. Look at the composites for those 4 years. Again, no real signal either way in our region. And for the seasonal outlook, August through October, again, it's kind of similar to what we looked for this month of August. Generally warm across most of the U.S. Again, I think we're going to have a lot more ridging into the late summer and fall across the western U.S. That's going to keep things a bit warmer, particularly the further west we go in the state. The seasonal outlook for precipitation shows dry favored for pretty much the entire state of Nebraska and a lot of the corn, at least the western half of the Corn Belt. Seasonal drought outlook shows drought likely to expand into parts of western Nebraska. And GrassCast shows probably going to have below average forest production levels across the high plains. You've definitely seen some improvement year-on-year vegetation conditions across the Corn Belt. We are expecting average to above average yields on a lot of rain-fed corn and about average on irrigated corn this year. Thanks, and back to you, Bryce.
All right, thanks there, Eric. Going back a couple of slides, sure hope that cooler weather does come to fruition. That'd be nice for everybody involved. Severe storms and high winds can certainly cause a lot of problems for crops. They can also cause a lot of damage to irrigation systems. When that happens, replacing those systems, as you know, can be quite costly and time-consuming. That's why University of Nebraska researchers are looking into how high wind impacts irrigation systems in order to find a better solution for keeping them upright. Market Journal's Mike Straub brings us this story.
Nebraska winds are responsible for causing unexpected expenses and repairs when pivot systems get blown over several times a year. A team at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln have been doing research in hopes of finding a way to reduce the number of pivots that are affected by high winds.
This summer we've had many center pivots blow over in storms, and that's unfortunately kind of one of Nebraska's plagues, is that center pivots are great for irrigation, but storms love to play with them too and toss them over and break them up. And so this year we decided to pull together a team at UNL to do some research, some investigation to see if we can find ways to maybe reduce the number of them that tip over. You know, the idea might be, is there a direction that you can park them to make them a little less likely to blow over? Is there some design changes that could be made to center pivots? Other tips that we can try and find. And so we pulled together a team that has some guys from the meteorology group that understand storms and can pull data from different events and pull that together. And we're working with the pivot manufacturers and insurance industry to try and get their database. And then we're also working with the engineering group to see what we can learn about modeling and some of the things we can do on how maybe there's some changes that we can make if we understand how wind interacts with center pivots. When a pivot gets blown over, it's an expensive deal. Most people carry insurance on them, so if they're fully insured, it pretty much covers the replacement cost. But of course, if you don't have insurance on it, buying a new pivot's somewhere around $100,000, as I understand right now, and so certainly whether the farmer's paying for it or the insurance company's paying for it, there's a lot of dollars worth of damage if it gets completely destroyed. And if it blows over in early spring before the crop's planted, and there hasn't been too many others in the neighborhood blow over, you can usually get a pivot delivered pretty quickly and get it put up without any crop damage. But of course, if it blows over in irrigation season, you can't irrigate until it gets put back up. And typically when a storm goes through in a neighborhood, it doesn't just tip over one or two, it tips over several. So it's hard to get the dealer out there quickly to redo a lot of pivots. And so sometimes it, and of course you tear up 10 acres of corn or something, taking the old pivot out and putting up a new one.
To better understand the reason why pivots blow over, researchers will be using sensors along the system to study the vibration of the structure over time, helping to understand the internal structure and how it ultimately responds in a high windstorm.
And anytime we measure the vibration of a structure, that allows us to understand a lot about the internal structure and how it's going to respond in a flexible manner to any sort of excitation. And so that can provide us with some really helpful data for an individual span, an individual pivot. But what we're also doing today is collecting it for several different spans, both without water, while water's on, so that we can start to understand how some of the variations in pivots actually correspond to the structure, and then ultimately how that relates to its performance during a high wind storm. Like, what we're kind of gathering is we're going to get really high quality data about an individual pivot. However, it's also capturing all of the very high uniqueness about that individual pivot. And so we'll gain a lot of insight into what exactly, an individual truss member here, thickness of the pipe, height, length, number of spans, all of these different things, and how that factors into its wind performance. But then we have all of these other characteristics that really make something incredibly unique, like the pattern of the wheels, how deep that is in right now. Even the weather on a given day impacts the data that we receive. And so in that case, to help us avoid over-attributing something to a particular structural characteristic, what we'll be able to find are certain variations of pivot that may be more resistant to wind. And so that would certainly help manufacturers and designers if they want to, provide the most wind-resistant pivot to their customers. It can also help on the producer side, since they're the ones making the decisions about what pivot's going to best work for them, and they'll be able to balance the pros and cons of different systems for their own production needs along with wind resistance.
Pivot structure research can change the way manufacturers think about designing irrigation systems. Those changes can be beneficial to producers by eliminating the chance for high wind damage and unexpected cost, repairs, and loss of water source. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Mike Straub.
While finding a solution for mitigating wind-driven damage to pivot irrigation systems would, of course, be a game changer, most experts in the field want to remind you that insurance is still the safest option to hedge against the potential disaster when it comes to financial impacts. That's about all the time we have for this week's show. I want to let you know that next week we'll be talking about perhaps scheduling late season or final irrigation applications, and we'll get information on the upcoming Goodmanson Sandhills Laboratory Open House. They're celebrating 25 years this year. If you missed one of our stories this week, be sure you're following along with the Market Journal team on YouTube and on all of our social media accounts. That's where you can join in on the conversation. And remember, if you're looking for more ways to watch this show on your timeline, you can find us and download the app. It's called Acres TV onto your Roku or Fire TV device. We hope to see you back here next time. But until then, I'm Bryce Duskett, wishing you a safe and productive week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.